Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about why the Protestant Revolution didn't happen in Spain. What are some factors behind that? Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, secutora in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Now you might be asking, Gregory, why do we care about one particular country, Spain? Well, there's a lot of historical significance as to why Spain remained Catholic and what lasting influence that had, namely Latin America, right? So if Spain had gone Protestant, the Western Hemisphere, especially the Latin American area, could have been vastly different. So we do have a playlist here in history. I'll make sure I put it up here later on. So if you want to, you're more of a history geek, we do have episodes on like how to retort to the Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition, how to respond to the Crusades, and we do have an episode on the Reconquista. So there are some things that make Spain unique in its location and in its history that made it essentially impervious to Protestant heresy when the 16th century rolled around and later on. Nowadays, of course, it's very sad. Spain has lost not just its Catholic faith, it's just lost Christianity in general. We have an episode I did when I was in Florence, how Europe is essentially a mission country. Spain is no different. I did an episode not that long ago about how the government in Spain, which for the most recent years has been socialist, was banning the public recitation of the rosary. So, I mean, this country has gone off the deep end. It's not to say that there aren't pockets of Catholicism, and there's definitely people there. There was on the feast day of Our Lady of Rosary, there were in different cities in Spain people who were rebuking this law and doing the rosary in public. And certainly these people know the history of Spain. It's like, how did we end up like this when we were the defenders of the faith in the 16th century? We were the head country behind the Holy League that defeated the Ottoman Turks in the Battle of Lepanto. You know, we have this great history. And when I say we, my family's from Spain. My parents were born in Mexico. I was born here in Houston, but ethnically we are from Spain. Our family moved to Mexico during the Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s, and essentially intermingled with the other peninsulares. That's why I look so light-skinned. I don't look Mexican. But I do have a connection to Spain. I've been there several times. I spent my first time to Europe when I was only 20 years old. I did a summer abroad there in the Basque Country. I love Spain. So what is the unique situation with Spain back in the day? So remember, there's a couple of things. Spain is geographically isolated from the rest of Europe, and this does play a role. Because if you look at a place like Germany, which is centrally located, it's easier for Protestant heresy to spread than if you are pretty much on a peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, and you have the Pyrenees Mountains separating them. So that did play a role. Now, it also played a role with another reason why the religion was so electrified, and we'll get to that in a second. But if you look at Germany, Germany was in a unique situation. A lot of people have this misunderstanding that the Protestant Revolution happened because of Johann Tetzel and the indulgences and all these things. It's nothing to do with that. We have an episode, did the Protestant Reformation have to happen? And it was nothing about reforming the church. The church was in constant reform, especially since the days of the early 1200s with St. Dominic and St. Francis. It wasn't an issue of that. There were just a lot of factors that came into play, a lot of them political, a lot of them social, that was a perfect kind of maelstrom that led to the 95 Thesis in 1517. And if you look, Germany was made up of a bunch of principalities, and there was a lot of conflict and tension with Rome at the time. Germany was very wealthy, and some of the Germans resented the fact that Rome was using their money for purposes that they didn't really want. They felt like they were just the bank of the papacy, and there's just other factors. So we have videos on Germany, but Spain was very different. So Spain is coming off of 700 years of the Reconquista. Remember that the Moorish Muslims came across the Straits of Gibraltar in the early 700s and took up 90% of Spain, and 90% of Spain became Muslim. It was the Visigothic, Catholic Visigothic kingdom that was centered in Toledo, beautiful town, most famous for El Greco paintings, was toppled, and there was only a small little bastion up in Cantabria, up in the northern coast, that remained Christian. And there was the Battle of Covadonga, which is very famous in Spanish history, where this little small group of Christians beat the Moors. And so that was the little pocket. And then if you look from the early 700s all the way to the late 1400s, they're working their way down. El Cid, maybe one of the most famous people, you might have heard him, famous knight, working their way down, pushing the Moors out. And this kind of forged an identity among these Christian kingdoms. You've heard of them: Aragon, Castile, Leon, Portugal. All these had this fire for the faith, probably because you tend to have more of a fire for your faith when you're being persecuted. So you have this. Then eventually Ferdinand and Isabel unite the two major kingdoms. Portugal is separate. Eventually Portugal does come in the Spanish Empire, but that's much later on. That's in the 1580 to 1640. But they're all unified under Ferdinand and Isabel. Ferdinand and Isabel, they expel the Jews. We talked about in a previous episode why that is. And they also they kick out the last Moorish kingdom in Granada. Beautiful town if you ever go to Granada. And so now, finally, the Iberian Peninsula is Christian again. But the story doesn't end there. So then you have the next 150 years of now the Ottoman Turks trying to spread through the Mediterranean. Of course, the North African littoral, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, this is still very Muslim. They're throwing incursions into Spain. One of the reasons for the Spanish Inquisition was that a lot of the Muslims they converted, but they really didn't convert. And so the Spanish Inquisition was designed to weed out these fake converters because they were undermining the crown. They were trying to topple the crown. They were trying to invite Moors across the ocean to invade. So they were treasonous. And so that's one of the reasons you had the Inquisition. So you're dealing with that. Plus you have the discovery of the New World happen around this time in the early 1500s. And this was like, a godsend. We're losing, if you think about this, we're losing half of Germany, eventually all of Scandinavia, the Netherlands, to the Protestant heresy. And then as kind of a divine providence, this whole entire world opens up. So you see in the Spanish milieu, in the Spanish environment, they're forged in all these different things. They already have the crusading spirit in them. Their faith is very important to them because they were persecuted for hundreds of years. They're continuing to have to worry about this Turkish specter across the Mediterranean. And then they want to bring this crusading spirit and this fire for the faith to this new world to baptize these heathens. And there's the idea that the conquistadors were all horrible people that enslaved all the Indians. This is not true. You look at Bartholomew de las Casas, you look at all these great theologians of the 1500s, and the papacy backed this up. We have an episode on the papacy was for the transatlantic slave trade. It's absolute nonsense. You can look at the paperwork, the encyclicals that were coming out as early as 1430 from the Pope saying that this is wrong, slavery is wrong. Now, whether or not people listen, of course, that's a separate thing, right? The church has been saying abortion's wrong. How many Christians support abortion? So, I mean, you can say the official church teaching, and Protestants, you can agree this too. The church can officially say one thing. Doesn't mean that people are going to believe, because Christ said we're going to have the wheat and the weeds, and until the end of time, and that's when you separate the wheat and the weeds. So you look at this. Also, the other thing is the geography, right? They're kind of isolated. Where France had a very Catholic kingdom, a Catholic king like Francis, but they were right next to what? Germany. They were right next to Geneva, where Calvin was. They were very close to the Netherlands, which was very Calvinist. They were very close to England. So they didn't have that geographic cushion, so to speak. And you could say the same thing for Italy. Italy and Spain are very close cousins in terms of history and geography as well, because Italy was kind of cushioned, but they also had the Ottoman threat around them as well. The other thing that Spain had going for them is they had really good leadership, whereas Germany was a confederation of principalities, some of them Catholic, some of them later on became Protestant, especially the northern ones. Spain was unified under Ferdinand and Isabel, and then their grandson, Charles I, Charles V, if you want to call him the Holy Roman Emperor, he controlled Spain and the Low Country and the German holdings. He was a champion of Catholicism. Now, his personal life maybe wasn't the best. He had illegitimate children, most famously Don Juan, who was the leader during the Battle of Lepanto. But he was always fighting the Turks. He was always fighting the Protestants. And then later on, his son, Philip II. This is really the golden age of Spain. Philip II actually was a champion of Catholicism, but his personal life was very pious as well. And so you look at this time really from the 1470s when Ferdinand and Isabel unified the peninsula aside from Portugal, and then up to about 1598 when Philip died. You had this 130 years of just very strong, centralized leadership that had a singular focus. And the singular focus was orthodoxy, not Greek orthodoxy, but just orthodoxy in Catholicism. It was a champion of Catholicism. And so the last thing is, so Protestantism, Protestant tracts, Protestant books, all these things really didn't infiltrate into Spain because of geographic distances and because a lot of it was just the people really weren't into Protestant heresy. It just, again, a lot of it was political, a lot of it was socioeconomic. This is why that Germany was a perfect place for it to happen. But in Spain, it was a different mindset that was forged out of hundreds of years of the Reconquista and also electrified by the New World and colonizing and evangelizing to the New World. Plus, it had really good leadership. Plus, we had extremely good saints. You look at this time, you have John of Avila, you have St. John of the Cross, you have Teresa of Avila, you have St. John of Alcantara, you have all these like great saints that emerged from this time in Spain. Many of them are doctors of the church, like Teresa of Avila. And so there's just this great time in the golden age of Spain that kind of prevented all the Protestant heresies from coming in. The people just weren't receptive. And the Inquisition too, the Inquisition was never set up to persecute Protestants. Again, a big just boogeyman lie that Protestants don't understand, but they don't want to look up in the history. The Spanish Inquisition, because remember there was a Roman Inquisition as well. The Spanish Inquisition was set up, it could only prosecute Catholics, Catholic converts, so either Jews that converted or Muslims that converted. It never went after Protestants. That being said, part of the job of the Inquisition was to prevent as much as they could books that were contrary to the faith. And so they would try to, either if they found these books, they would intercept them and then they would read them and decide whether or not they were orthodox or not. And so part of their job was to keep this Protestant heretical filth out of the country. And as a whole, they did a good job. But in the long run, you look at all of Europe. All of Europe has fallen to secular hedonism and materialism and all these things, and it's quite sad. But these are just some reasons why Spain never became Protestant. Guys, post in the comments. I'd like to hear from you. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.